So we finally have some specs about the highly anticipated Canon EOS R7, and well, do they meet expectations? Well, you can be the judge for yourself. Now, these leaked specs are coming from Canon rumors, but they only have this as a CR1, so that means you kind of have to take some of these with a grain of salt. That being said, these partially line up to some of the breadcrumbs we've had in the past, so I would say these are at least partially true.
That's hearsay, I guess.
Not to bury the lead any further, let's get into these. Canon rumors says this will have a 32 megapixel APS-C BSI sensor, and that's not exactly a surprise. We heard in the past, I guess it was close to a year ago now. I mean, time flies, it's absolutely nuts. But we did hear that they were developing a BSI APS-C sensor that was going to be put in multiple cameras. So I suspect that this is the sensor that we heard about in the past. And even back then, Canon rumors suspected that it would be coming in somewhere between 28 and 32 megapixels, but they didn't really have much to base that on back then. It was just pure speculation, but it seems like that's going to be the case. This will be capable of shooting 20 frames per second, which to me is plenty fast, and I think many people would be very excited about that. I'm guessing this will be 20 frames per second electronic and 12 frames per second mechanical, basically like the R5 and the R6 is. Also like the R5 and R6, this will come with the Digic X processor. Nothing very surprising here, especially when you consider the supply chain issues. Makes sense for them to use that very powerful processor in multiple cameras. This will also have dual card slots, one CF Express Type B card and one SD card like the R5 and R3. Now moving on to some video specs, they say that this will have 4K at up to 60 frames per second. I'm assuming they mean in 10-bit 422. I would be very shocked if this did not have 10-bit in this camera. And well, with the way Canon's been doing things lately, maybe even add some RAW here. Also, according to this leak, it will do 1080p at up to 240 frames per second. So that is pretty awesome and is a feature that I don't think any of the Canon cameras have had up until this point. Now, to me, these video specs seem a little bit on the downside. I mean, I'm not saying that this will not be good for a lot of people. That being said, this is an APS-C sensor, and if you're going to have that same processor in it that can push crazy high-end video out of full-frame cameras, why not do something special with it? Why not have a 4K 120 here? Especially if this is going to be your top-of-the-line APS-C camera, I just expect a little bit more. Also, if you consider that Fujifilm had these specs in their X-T3 back in, I think it was either 2018 or 2019, I mean, it seems less impressive when you put it that way, especially for a camera that is coming out later this year, but more on to that later. But of course, one thing that this camera does have going for it is a Canon camera, so you can expect this to have the great autofocus that Canon is known for, and Fujifilm has kind of been lacking up until this point. Now, there is supposed to be an XH2 coming out, or actually two versions of that coming out later from Fujifilm, and that's going to be like their flagship APS-C camera. And so far we've heard some pretty incredible leak specs from that, so if that has some great autofocus, then I think Canon could be in trouble here. Granted, they still have the name brand Canon, and people love their Canon cameras, and they've been really waiting for an APS-C camera. Moving on, this will have a C-Log 3, which should do great to get you a lot of dynamic range out of this camera, and well, kind of confirms even further that it's going to be 10-bit. Also, good news for video is this will have the digital Hotshoe that was first introduced in the R3 and is in the R5C now at this point. The digital Hotshoe allows you to add different cool accessories for your camera. Most important to video, at least in my mind, is the ability to add XLR audio input, which is a very clean digital sound. And for photographers, the digital Hotshoe also supports some flashes, and at 32 megapixels, I'm sure at least some people will be using this for their portrait photography. And according to this leak, the ergonomics of this camera will be close to the R5 and R6. So the APS-C sensor isn't going to be adding, or well, it's not going to be subtracting any size to the camera. And very exciting if true, this camera will be announced in August of 2022. For now, that is all the information that Canon rumors has. They do say that they're going to try to verify these specs. So hopefully we will hear in maybe the next week or so whether or not this will be bumped up to, say, a CR2. Let's, I guess, cross our fingers, or at least cross our fingers that this camera is actually going to be coming out this year. Overall, I think that these specs are, suitable. I think that some people will be very excited about it. That being said, I do find this pretty funny that these are similar specs that we were hearing about back in 2020. So I was kind of hoping that, you know, maybe an extra 2 years they would bump it up a little bit. But hey, if they price this thing right and add some APS-C lenses to the RF mount, I think we got a very solid camera here. But what do you think? Drop in the comment section below and let me know. If you've liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and until next time, peace.